Good evening. Welcome to
الخير.
the community meeting for the 1703 Swing Space. We are going to give a little bit of time for everyone to come in and then we will get started. Thank you. Okay, so in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. Thank you again for joining us for the virtual community meeting for the swing space that will be held at 1703 North Beauregard. During tonight's meeting, we will have interpretation services available. In order to take advantage of interpretation, you're going to select the small globe at the bottom of your screen and then select your desired language. I'm going to allow my interpreters to explain as well. My Spanish interpreter, go ahead.
Buenas noches y bienvenidos a esta reunión hoy noche. Para los que deseen aprovechar de la opción para utilizar interpretación en inglés, seleccione el globo que esté en la parte inferior de su pantalla y elija el idioma español para recibir interpretación en ese idioma. Gracias.
Thank you. My Dari interpreter, go ahead.
سلام بخیر. امروز برنامه هست که در مورد آدرس امبروگارد استریت صحبت میشه، در مورد ساختمان استریت. برنامه به خاطر گرفته شده به شما معلومات داده و برای اینکه
Thank you. My Amharic interpreter.
ጤና ይስጥልኝ። እንኳን ወደዚህ ስብሰባ በሰላም መጣችሁ። ዛሬ የትርጉም አገልግሎት ተዘጋጅቶላችኋል። አማርኛ የሚለውን የዓለማውን ቅርጽ በመንካት አማርኛ የሚለውን በመምረጥ አምሃሪክ የሚለውን በመምረጥ የትርጉም አገልግሎት ስለተዘጋጀላችሁ በዛ መጠቀም ትችላላችሁ። አመሰግናለሁ።
Thank you so much. And my Arabic interpreter. I'm sorry, give me just a moment. My Arabic interpreter, are you with us?
مرحبا بكم بالنتورك مخطط البناء في شارع 1703 نورث بورغارد. يرجى الضغط على أسفل الشاشة للحصول على الترجمة الفورية باللغة العربية. شكرا.
Thank you so much. Interpretation is now active. At the close of tonight's presentation, we will also have a question and answer session where you will have the opportunity to ask any questions that may not have been presented during the presentation. Please feel free to put those questions in the Q&A chat during the presentation so that we may go through them at the close. And with that, I will turn it over to Sophie Humer.
Thank you, Artia. Good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to hear an update on the swing space for George Mason and Cora Kelly at 1703 North Beauregard Street. Tonight, we'll be going over introductions, the swing space timeline, then we'll be going over a construction update, swing space logistics, next steps, and then at the end, we'll give a brief George Mason update, and then we'll close with questions. Just a few of the folks that you might be hearing from tonight. We have with us Erica Gulick, who's our Executive Director of Facilities. Myself, Sophie Humer, I'm the Principal Planner for Facilities. Sam Paspinori, who is our Capital Programs Manager. Artia Funderburk, our CIP Communications Specialist, who opened us up. Karen Gioconda, who's an Associate Principal at Perkins Eastman, working on the design and engineering for the building. And then Santiago Mejia, project manager for Gilbane Building Company. We also have a few City of Alexandria staff joining us this evening. This is an image, if you guys are familiar with some of our other updates that we have given on the swing space. Currently, this is the anticipated building timeline. We are in the permitting and construction phase of the project. Demolition has started on the building, and we will see construction starting very soon. More to come on that later in the presentation. The biggest note is now that demolition has begun, we are in the construction phase, and we anticipate the school space to be finished in 2025. The earliest students will be fall 2025-2026 school year. We will talk more about the timing at future meetings, and at the end of this presentation, we will give a brief update on the George Mason design. And I'll turn it over to Karen to give an overview of our site plan.
Thanks. So for those of you who have never seen the site plan, I'm happy to walk you through it a little bit. If you're familiar with the Ferdinand T. Day site, our swing space and swing school is right across the courtyard from that. The existing bus route will remain in place. There's a bus loop right in front of the two buildings. The parent drop off and its loop will remain the same as well, where you drop off kind of under the Ferdinand T. Day gym. And then there are two opportunities for recess spaces. One of them is a new natural playground that will be between the two schools. And a second one that's proposed is towards the north side of the site, where we are looking at putting a potential playground location. To talk a little bit about what's inside the building, what we've looked at, one thing to note is that on level 1, the Goddard School, which is an existing preschool, will stay in place. We'll have a completely separate entrance and separate security for the students that will be joining us. So visitor check-in as well as the kitchen are both located on the first level. Thanks, Artia. I'm a fast talker. On the second level, we have our student and dining and our servery. That's also where the main admin and health suite will be. And then we have some of our kindergarten and special ed classrooms on level 2. On level 3, we have a multi-purpose space. We also have our art room. And then we have a series of classrooms as well with an extended learning area and some admin. And then on level 4, that's where the library is, right across from the music room. We have more classrooms and then additional extended learning and admin space. So the intent, as you can see on the right-hand side, is that sort of all of our encore spaces and special spaces stack up. And then all of our classrooms are as regular as that we can make them on the two sides of all of the floors.
So to give you a quick update on construction, and just going from what Sophie mentioned, we have started the demolition of the interior of the building. So right now we're just getting all the furniture, all of the interior drywall and ceilings off the building to get it prepared for our construction phase. Demolition right now is ongoing until late spring, at which point we'll start the interior construction of the new building. And then we'll also kind of focus on some of the site utilities and exterior site work as well. So that's the update at this point for the construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen and Santi. Just to go over a few of the swing space logistics. First up is transportation. Students will be provided transportation. Bus stop assignments will not be provided until the summer of 2025 if the start date for the swing space is the school year 25-26. Our traffic impact analysis is complete and submitted to the city for review. A big part of that was close coordination with Ferdinand T. Day and the inclusion of staggered start times and dismissal times. This is very similar to the Douglas MacArthur swing space operation at the old Patrick Henry School. Lastly, after school programming, we had the chance to work with Campania, and they will be able to offer after school care, and we are currently working with RPCA and Campania on those elements.
All right, so next steps and communications as it relates to the 1703 Swing Space project. Construction has begun and is ongoing. We would like to host another community meeting in the spring where we will provide another project update. Communication will continuously be made available on the Capital Programs Planning and Design webpage, as well as in our monthly CIP newsletter. If you have not already signed up for our newsletter, please do so. It highlights all of our major projects and also our educational and facility projects as well. I will turn it back over to Sophie to briefly discuss George Mason.
This is our last slide for the evening. Just a brief update on George Mason modernization. The budget in our current fiscal year, FY24, we have $17 million allocated to get us started on design. In FY25, the school board approved $87 million this past December. This will take us into construction. This must be approved by City Council this spring. So the next steps for the ACPS team from now until spring of 2024 is to select the design team for George Mason. For those of you who aren't familiar, a design team will provide school design options based on the final CIP budget approval. We'll also be starting our communications plan with the established advisory team to establish an advisory team, regular community meetings, communications with the PTA, and website communications, as well as communications with our civic associations. And with that, I will conclude the presentation and turn it over to everyone here for Q&A. Please put your questions into the Q&A chat box, and we will begin soon.
Thank you, Sophie. So our contacts for the 1703 project is Sophie Humer, our principal planner, Sam Path, our capital programs manager, and myself, Artia Funderburk, the CIP communication specialist. All right, so our first question of the night: has demolition of George Mason already started?
No, George Mason is not being demolished at this time. Demo has begun on the 1703 North Beauregard swing space.
Thank you. This is a question as it relates to transportation. Will there likely be just one bus from George Mason or several bus routes across the neighborhood?
No, it will be several buses, just like Douglas MacArthur was served at the Patrick Henry swing space. We will provide as many buses as possible to, or as many as needed to transport students in the George Mason neighborhood to the swing space. Karen also outlined the Kiss and Ride, which will also be available. We definitely encourage transportation and using our wonderful transportation staff, but that option will also be available for families to use the Kiss and Ride at 1703.
Thank you. Could you share a little bit about the building layout, specifically the music room being next to the library versus having music and PE in the same vicinity?
Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for the mute button. Karen, would you mind taking that question?
Sure. So this is something that we definitely juggled. It's a relatively small floor plate and a stacked floor plate, which is unique. But music is actually significantly, it is loud, but it also requires specific acoustics. And so we put it adjacent to the library because it has soundproof walls, as does the library, and there won't be as much vibration or noises coming from the multipurpose room on the fourth floor. So the music, the library, the art room, and the multipurpose room all have floor to under slab walls that are acoustically separated and doors on them. So we're hoping that we've done our best and our due diligence to keep those spaces as quiet as possible.
Thank you, Karen. Can you share a little bit about how the schedule will be affected if the budget is not fully approved by the city?
Yeah, so if the amount is not approved by the city, we will still proceed with the design for George Mason that may include that would include the necessities to modernize the facility, but within the scope of the budget. And I don't know if Erica, if you want to add anything else to that schedule timeline.
I would just say that we've been given no indication from the city that they wouldn't approve any budget for George Mason. They think it's really a matter of if it's the budget that the school board has adopted or something less than that. So we'd move forward with the design, and the schedule would stay as planned, given what Sophie and the team articulated today, which is that George Mason wouldn't be moving into the swing space until fall of 2025.
Thank you. Is the playground showing as pending? It is considered a necessity for the students.
Can you go back to that slide, Artia? And then Karen, do you mind answering that question?
Sure. So we are working with a relatively tight budget for the swing space because we understand it's a temporary location and we're working on prioritizing funding for other projects. And so right now it's a potential playground location because we're still working through whether or not we can afford to do it. But we have studied it thoroughly and have put it in for permit with the hopes that we'll be able to afford it.
And Karen, can you also speak a little bit to the natural playground at the front of the school?
Sure. The natural playground is something that we are definitely hoping to keep in the project and have not looked at removing. And that is the closest play space that we have to the swing school. Other opportunities for play space within the swing school include the multipurpose room, as well as the cafeteria or servery once you break it all down.
Thanks,
Thank
Karen. Yeah, it's
you.
definitely a priority for us as well.
Is the George Mason project still getting a $20 million cut?
Erica, will you?
Sure. So where we are in the budget process is the school board has adopted its budget, which includes the budget that was included for George Mason last year, which is the full 87 million in FY 2025. Now that is really up to the city council to decide if they're funding or not. The city manager proposes his budget, I believe, on February 27th for both the operating and the CIP. And then we'll be going through a series of work sessions with city council, and city council will have its own work sessions. Those are the best places to advocate, as well as reaching out to your local city council member and letting them know about this need. Certainly the school board has acknowledged that it is a need and put that funding back in. So as of now, the budget is was fully proposed last year for George Mason.
Thank you. Will the advisory team include members of the community like the PTA, neighbors, and et cetera?
So the advisory team is called the Superintendent's Advisory Team. It's a team of community members, school members, PTA, chosen at the discretion of the superintendent. And Erica, I'd ask you to speak to how that was working on past projects for ACPS.
So the advisory groups are typically made up of, as Sophie said, civic associations who are local to that school, PTA members, usually principal or staff or designee, city council and school board members. We usually will solicit interest or receive that, and ultimately it's a superintendent's advisory committee. So the superintendent will create the advisory group that then will carry through mostly the design process and kind of serve as additional outreach during the construction process. Is there anything I missed? So, no.
Will the fitness space be big enough for PE?
Karen.
Yep, I can speak to how big it is. Just to talk a little bit about the scale, where you see the text multi-purpose fitness, there's about a half-size basketball court there. There is also a rock climbing wall on the top corner, sort of near the art room. And there is a specific sprinting line that we were asked to put in, as well as a small volleyball court that can all fit. So in general, when we've spoken to the physical education teachers, we've discussed this multi-purpose space as being more like centers focused than necessarily a basketball court. And should a basketball court, more of a full-size one, be needed, we have spoken to Ferdinand T. Day and spoken about opportunities to utilize their facilities from time to time.
Thank you. If the George Mason modernization project is not ready to start when the swing space is ready in the summer of 2025, is the plan still to move George Mason students into the swing space?
No, the swing space would be ready for George Mason students once construction starts on George Mason. Our intent is to have the George Mason students in the swing space for as short as time as possible so that we can move through construction of the new George Mason and get those students back to a new building.
Can I add to that? So,
yeah.
So the way the design and construction timeline is now for George Mason, we would be procuring design, hopefully going to hearing sometime in the next fall or winter. And with the swing space schedule has already been impacted. We were originally looking at a winter 2020, a mid-year move. I think avoiding a mid-year move will be the least impactful to George Mason. And so that will be our goal. At this time, we would plan that the George Mason will be moving into the swing space in the fall of 2025, because even if construction doesn't start right in August, it may start in December or it may start in January, and we would need that site available and students vacated. Of course, all of this is fluid and moving, and if there's one thing I know from working in construction, it's that timelines change. So we'll continue to keep you updated, but as of now, with the impact to the swing space schedule and the impact from the funding, we are targeting for George Mason to move to the swing space in the fall of 2025.
Thank you. Where will the kids evacuate for a fire emergency?
I can speak to this. If you jump back to the floor plans, I can show you where all of the exits are. So the building currently has 2 stairwells on the interior. They're both highlighted in yellow. And so students will be able to evacuate via those stairwells. One will evacuate towards the courtyard, so between Ferdinand T. Day and the new building. The other one evacuates towards the parking garage. And then a new stair that we're adding for egress and for fire safety is shown all the way to the left side of the building. That will exit again more towards the parking garage. So the exact location where the students will gather is something that we're going to need to develop as part of an operational plan. But there will be 3 egress stairs for students, all of which will be fire safe. There are additionally 2 elevators for the building for ADA compliance primarily, or for wheelchair access primarily, but they will also be fire safe should there be any need for firefighters to come up and down the building.
Thank you. Will the Kiss and Ride accommodate an over height of about 10 feet handicap vehicle?
It currently accommodates a fire truck, so I believe that it will also accommodate a 10-foot vehicle, but we will also follow up on that, make sure that information's available.
Thank you. Could you share a little bit about what a natural playground is?
Sure. A natural playground is generally meant for younger students, so it tends to be equipment that kids interact with, that they can climb on and jump next to, but not necessarily the large scale play structures that you might see for older students.
Thank you. Can you speak to the increased capacity at the new building, meaning the number of students? Any chance that it can be used for existing community as an elementary and middle versus sending more children in?
I'm sorry, Artia, can you repeat the question?
I think
Can
it's
you-
about George Mason, right? It's not about.
Right. Yes.
Okay,
So
yes.
can you
Yeah,
speak to
George-
the capacity? Sorry for that.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so the George Mason capacity is expected to the feasibility studies that we did in 2020 and 2021 showed an increase of capacity to 620 students at George Mason. This was to address citywide elementary capacity needs, as well as an increase to our pre-K and early childhood education spaces. The school, of course, will be available for community use, as all of our schools are. And I would, as we go through the design, more information will be provided as the George Mason design starts.
What is currently at the swing space? Is it vacant? Is it an office?
It was formerly an office building. It has been vacated as of this fall, except for the first floor, which still houses the Goddard School. About half of the first floor is dedicated to that preschool. And as was mentioned, it is currently under construction, so demolition has occurred or is starting to occur on the second, third, and fourth floors now.
What are the logistics for getting library materials over to the swing space?
Library materials will come over with any other materials that the George Mason teachers and staff need to bring over to the new swing space. This was a coordinated effort also on Douglas MacArthur moving to the old Patrick Henry swing space. And I think we've certainly learned from that experience, and we hope to move forward with moving the library materials with everything else over to the swing space. And we will also work closely with our librarian as well as other teaching, learning, and leadership staff to accomplish that.
We would just like to confirm that there will be no interruption to instruction during the time that staff and teachers and staff are moving into the swing space. That's a question of whether it will be an interruption to instruction.
So I can jump in on that. So no, we try to minimize the impact to staff moving as much as possible. Fortunately for George Mason and Cora Kelly communities, we now have experience doing this, moving Douglas MacArthur to a swing space. We understand the extra time that staff need and have been able to provide that time to staff to ensure they're able to pack their things, as well as give them clear direction and move to the new school with minimal impact or no impact to instruction.
I'm sorry. Could you share a little bit about the staggered start times for the campuses?
Those times have not been officially established, but they would be 30-minute increments between schools. So one school would start 30 minutes later than the other school.
And that
Um,
decision, just so everyone is aware, will largely be driven by what transportation is able to accommodate with the amount of students that will be transported to the school. So hopefully, as we get further along in the conversations about George Mason, we'll be able to firm that up with both Ferdinand Day and George Mason Elementary Schools.
Ferdinand T. Day, will Ferdinand T. Day share a playground space with the swing space students?
I would say at this time, that is not the plan. They have a play space that's directly connected to their school on top of the parking garage. And the 2 outdoor play spaces, should they occur, would be primarily for the use of the swing space students during the school day. After hours, the idea is that all of the students could use it for play space.
I would just add that ultimately that's something that the school administrators can coordinate if there's, you know, if Ferdinand Day wants to use the ground level playground and maybe George Mason or Cord Kelly can use the parking garage playgrounds. Those are, the sharing of amenities can kind of be coordinated through those administrators.
During construction of George Mason, will it be considered to have the fields remain open for the community?
As design of George Mason begins and starts, I think that's excellent feedback to bring to that conversation as we get it started. I will say that the feasibility studies that we did again in 2020 and 2021 had different scenarios for the placement of the George Mason building, and the school board agreed that the replacement of George Mason in place would be the least disruptive to the open space that the George Mason School currently sits on.
Thank you. Will George Mason parents be permitted to use the parking ramp if they need to visit the school during the day?
Yes, the parking garage will be open to George Mason parents and visitors throughout the day.
I believe this was mentioned, but how long are George Mason students expected to be at the swing space?
It would be for the duration of the George Mason construction. Generally, that's anywhere between 18 to 24 months for the size that we were predicting in our feasibility studies. And those construction timelines will kind of clarify as we move through the design process, and certainly before we move George Mason students into the swing space.
Can you share a little bit about when staff will be permitted to move into the swing space? When will that happen? Will that be during the school day, after hours, on weekends?
Erica, will you take that question?
Sure. So in the past, we work very closely with the schools and their administration on what works best for their school teams. So that may be on a professional development day. They're provided time to either pack or unpack. It may be providing funds for for our staff to be able to work on the weekends if that's what they prefer. Or often the case is that we get an additional 2 days prior to them coming back in August for their professional development and learning time to set up for their new class. So ultimately, we'll work with Principal Finan on what him and his staff expect and what they're able to accommodate and work around their schedule for that. But it's only on the weekends if they want it to be, is the goal. That was not the case for Patrick Henry, but we learned.
Thank Thank you. Just waiting to see if another question will come in. Okay. Looks like we've answered every question. We did have a few duplicates there. But if they're at the closing of tonight's meeting, if any questions come to you that maybe you did not think to ask at the time, please feel free to send those questions to myself. My email is here, artia.funderburk@acps.k12.va.us. Tonight's presentation, the PDF of the presentation will be made available on the Capital Programs Planning and Design webpage. A recording of tonight's meeting will be made available following closed captioning, which can take up to a week, but we try our best to get it loaded up to the website much quicker than that. We thank you all so much for joining. Please be on the lookout for more communication related to the project as well as related to the George Mason project. And if you have not done so, I strongly encourage you to sign up for our CIP newsletter that comes out monthly, and that provides the most up-to-date information on all our major projects. We thank you all so much for being with us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you in the spring at our next community meeting. Have a great evening.